So this morning, courage. Now, often, I don't know, from a broad perspective, how often do we think about courage when it comes to our own spiritual growth? How often do we think about courage when we start walking this path that is about peace and love and unicorns and fairy dust and bunnies and all the soft, kind little things in the world, right? We think about spirituality and it's just like dancing in the field and laying down in the green grass and watching the clouds change shape and all of that stuff. And then we start walking the path, we start learning and growing, and we're like, oh no, I get to face me. I get to look at me. I get to have events occur in my life that push me to say, do I really want to keep doing it that way? Or I start down the path and start saying, you know what? I want to love more. I want to be more peaceful. I want to be more joyful in my life. And all of a sudden things occur in my life and that challenge that say that all these little buttons that on all over my consciousness and my body, and they're like, things happen and I started to get angry. And I was like, no, I said I wanted to choose peace. No, I said I wanted to choose love. And all of these things occur to say, hey, this is what it's like, really like, to walk in a world where you get to choose love in the face of things we may not agree with. We get to choose joy in the face of events where up until now I would have gotten upset, picked up my toys, and gone home. I get to walk into events that say, you know what? How about we let go of this attachment to being right? How many of us have attachments to being right? Yeah, we all do. We all do. It's okay. It's part of being human. So today we're going to talk about courage. What does it take? What are the opportunities we have? And what are some of the places we can go to in consciousness in our own day-to-day thinking that will help us be more courageous? To be more courageous. And so I have a few quotes and I have a few thoughts and ideas, but I wanted to start with a story because this little book has been sitting on my table, and I've read this book a couple of times, but it's been sitting on my table all week. And I kept looking at it going, maybe there's something in there. Maybe there's something in there. It's a little book called The Tao of Pooh. And the Tao of Pooh. Winnie the Pooh. It's a very old book. It's been around forever. It's kind of a metaphysical classic in my estimation. Okay. And I hadn't found anything, and I picked it, and I threw it in my briefcase, and I brought it with me. I hadn't found anything. I was standing right in front. I was standing in front of Gail, and I found exactly what I needed. So thank you, Gail. Welcome, Gail. This is Gail's first time here. Say hi, Gail. Welcome. Yes. So bear with me as I read this last-minute addition to the talk today. This is from the back, towards the back of the book, the chapter called Nowhere and Nothing. It starts when we are children, helpless but aware of things, enjoying what is around us. Then we reach adolescence, still helpless, but trying at least to appear independent. When we outgrow that stage, we become adults. self-sufficient individuals, able and mature enough to help others as we have learned to help ourselves. But the adult is not the highest stage of development. The end of the cycle is that of the independent, clear-minded, all-seeing child. That is the level known as wisdom. When the Tao Te Ching and other wise books say things like return to the beginning, become a child again, that's what they're referring to. Why do the enlightened seem filled with light and happiness like children? Why do they sometimes even look and talk like children? Because they are. The wise are children who know. Their minds have been emptied of all the countless minute somethings of some small learning and filled with the wisdom of the great nothing, the way of the universe. So, the story comes to an end. They walked on, thinking of this and that, and by they came to an enchanted place on the very top of the forest called Galleon's Lap, which is 60-something trees in a circle. And Christopher Robin knew that it was enchanted because nobody had ever been able to count whether it was 63 or 64, not even when he tied a piece of string around each tree after he had counted it. Being enchanted, its floor was not like the floor of the forest, gorse and bracken and heather, but close-set grass, quiet and smooth and green. Sitting there, they could see the whole world spread out until it reached the sky. And whatever there was, all the world was there with them in Galleon's lap. Sometimes courage looks like being simple. Sometimes courage looks like letting go of what we have thought we knew. And sometimes courage looks like letting go of having to be the smartest person in the room and being quiet. Ernest Holmes writes this: self-confidence and courage go hand in hand with real worth and are but declarations of our wholeness. There is nothing petty or little about greatness. Declarations of wholeness. Declarations of our worth. What is wholeness really? We say wholeness, we say that there is a divine idea of us hidden back of all these things we've taken on over the course of our lives. All these ideas about who we and what we are. All these stories that people have told us about what's going on. All the stories about how I am smart, how I am wise, how I am attractive, how I am, whatever, how I'm not enough. All these stories about how maybe I've come up short in the mistakes I've made over the years. What are the stories that I've told me, that I've taken on, that I've bought into? Our wholeness depends greatly, I believe, on how much of those stories I can let go of. How many of the stories of limitation I can set aside. And how many of the stories that we prefer to tell, or once we have let those go, we have made way for the things that are new to us. Once I let go of the limitation, what am I going to take on? So if I set aside stories of fear, I take on stories of love. If I set aside stories of lack, I take on stories of prosperity and abundance. Do I have the courage to love myself freely enough, and fully enough to simply accept myself the way I am and then grow to be more? to know and trust that I am okay as I am. Cannot love me that much. Joe went to talk to the guy. I know. Yeah, I was like, so thank you, Joe. These declarations of wholeness are grounded in an idea that there's a divine idea of you and of me waiting to be revealed. What is it waiting for? What is it waiting for? It's simply waiting for my ability to accept the idea that I am more than I appear, that I am greater than I have been up until now, that I can take the stories that I've told myself about how I'm not enough and take the stories that others have told me and that I've bought into about how I'm not enough and say, you know what, that's nonsense. I am better than this. I am more than this. And sometimes it takes courage to set that aside because, yes, there we go. Thank you, Joe. It takes courage to look myself in the mirror, to look at myself in the mirror and say, you know what, Lee, or Steve, or Colette, or Gail, to look at myself in the eyes and say, you know what, I love you. You are more than you appear to be. You can choose to be, not you can, look myself in the mirror and say, you know what, today I choose to be more than I have been up until now. I choose to be happy and healthy and whole. I choose to be prosperous. And then to take that attitude and walk out into the world with it and know that I am worthy of being loved and that I'm worthy of loving myself, of being proud of me and being grateful for the me that I am. Because dang it, you're worth it. We're worth it. And we don't get told as we're growing up, we are not given license to stand and be proud of ourselves because it's self-centered or rude to speak well of ourselves in society. And I'm here to say, you know what, that's nonsense. And if you need permission, I'm giving it to you.
Thank you.
Feel free to speak well of yourself. Feel free to be proud of you. And it's okay to be courageous enough to stand up for you. To be courageous enough to set up little boundaries in your life to say, you know what, I'm willing to accept this, but not this. That's okay. Alan Cohen writes this. And I believe this is from his little book. I believe it because I read it. And I remember reading this. A book called The Dragon Doesn't Live Here Anymore. I may be wrong. I think it's from this one. It takes a lot of courage to release the familiar and seemingly secure, to embrace the new. But there is no real security in what is no longer meaningful. There is more security in the adventurous and exciting. For in movement there is life, and in change there is power. Wow. Real courage is letting go of what we have thought to be secure. How many of us get so locked into habitual ways of doing things that if some small thing in our little routine goes wrong, we get totally thrown? Anybody else? I'm fessing up. This morning, our morning, this morning was an example of my talk intruding into daily life. Right? We got up. My mornings, I was struggling, number one, with getting the last notes done, my last little rewrite done for the talk. It finally came together at the last minute. We start getting ourselves together. We're running ahead of schedule. Everything's looking good. All of a sudden, a couple of things go wrong. We're 10 minutes late getting out the door from our usual time, right? We go down on the usual route, and I turn 5 blocks too early and end up going out of our way and stopping at a whole different Starbucks along the way. And they didn't have the food I usually get, so I had to get something else. We get on the freeway, it's the whole thing. And then, I get here, Joe forgot his keys. So Joe and Jim are sitting out here waiting, and Katie and I are, we're 40 minutes later than we usually arrive. Wow. Now, in a previous period in my life, I'd have been totally thrown by that. And admittedly, I got a little frustrated for a while. And I went, and then I realized what was happening, and I laughed. I'm like, okay, this is my Sunday talk intruding on my life and teaching me or giving me a story to tell, basically. And it could have very easily totally messed me up. And I looked at what was going on, and I'm like, okay, and we got plenty of time. We're not going to be late. It's not like they're going to start without us. We have plenty of time. Everything worked out fine once we got here. And so part of the courage to change rests in being willing to hold everything as temporary. Nothing in this life is permanent. Anything, nothing. Nothing in this life is permanent. Nothing is forever. Only the unseen part of what we deal with is forever. The spirit back of everything is eternal. The qualities of spirit, love, light, life, peace, power, beauty, joy, health, wholeness, prosperity, abundance, all those things, all those qualities that eventually manifest themselves as the things and the thoughts and experiences that we live in, around, and through, and live in, through, and as each and every one of us, those qualities are eternal. Yes. How they show up changes. So the courage is to be willing to be engaged with the way Spirit shows up in this moment and know that none of it is forever. That Spirit is always going to find a new and more magical and more wonderful way to show up. For who? For you. And for me. And not just for you and for me, but as you and as me, and as everybody that we walk this world with. The courage is to be fully engaged with all of it and to be willing to let it go at the very same time. not always easy because we get attached. We get so attached to each other. We get so attached to the happy moments. We get so attached to the comfort of knowing that this is the way life is going to go day after day after day after day after day after day after day. The opportunity is in, rather than looking at that change as something that is challenging a norm, to shifting and looking at that and saying, you know what, this is an adventure I'm on, like Alan said. That it's a grand adventure. And the opportunity for us in embracing it as an adventure is that we get to be powerful and say, you know what, something greater than even this is around the corner waiting for me. What's the opportunity in that? How do I get to embrace that? Because that creative act is always going on. Ernest Holmes reminds us in the general summary of the science of mind, he writes this: no form is permanent. There is an eternal play of life upon itself. That eternal play happens in us. That eternal play happens around us. Life is always happening for us, for our good, for our growth, for our learning, for our joy, for whatever we say it shows up as. And how do we say that? By way of our belief, by way of the dominant tendency of our thinking, by way of our shifting our belief systems in such a way as to embrace more good, embrace more love, embrace more life. In the recovery community, we have something called the Serenity Prayer. And it goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We cannot change the ultimate reality that exists back of everything that we see. I cannot change the behavior of other people in this world. But what I can change, what I can manage, is me. What I think, what I believe, how I behave, the choices I make, and how I interact with others are all happen inside of me. Everything inside of me I can change. I can manage all of that. One thing at a time, one thought at a time, one belief at a time. These things I can change. That is where the courage begins and ends, friends. And it's inside of us. All of it. How I interact with the world, how I interact with myself, how I interact with the loved ones and all the other people in my life, all that begins and ends right here. And the life management, the personal management, the courage to change, the courage to evolve, the courage to grow happens right here. We get to do all of this. And yes, it's not a have to, it's a get to. We get to. Sometimes I know it can feel like a burden. Sometimes I know I get tired of the growing. I get tired of the changing. Change fatigue. That little word that popped up, I think, during during the COVID lockdown. We all got a case of change fatigue. I know it's a thing. But all along the way, we get to care for ourselves. All along the way, we get to refill our own cups. All along the way, we get to experience something greater, something more. And that is what makes it all worthwhile. Because every time I embrace more of that divine idea of me, and I have the courage to let go of what no longer serves me and embrace something new, make room for a greater experience of myself, of love, of joy, of happiness, all of that. Every time I do that, I get charged up. I get excited. Because I get to be more of me. And as I embrace more of me, the world in general seems to be a happier place. Right? Just a happier place. Let that rest right there. This week's spiritual practice. Here we go. Contemplation. This week, look deeply at your life in terms of what is working, what is not working, what is worth keeping, and what to let go of. What can be moved out, or what can be moved in order to, no, it should be moved out. What can be moved out in order to make, all right, anyway. What can be moved, period, or comma, in order to make room for what's next? What can be moved in order to make room for what's next? Right? How do I make space? How do I let go of something I don't want in order to make room for something I do want? What, as Beverly would say, what would I rather have?
What would I love?
What would I love? What would I love? Thank you. Not this. If not this, what would I love? Right? Thank you, Beverly. It's like in the head, it's like, what? What would I love? So I'll leave that with all of you for this week. And at this point, it's your turn. Questions, comments, it's up to you. We will even take comments. I have the chat in my hand. So if there's somebody in the chat that has a questions, I will take that too.
So as Reverend Lee, as you were talking, it reminded me of 2 weeks ago. So Debbie and I were had the opportunity to attend up Unleash the Power Within by Tony Robbins.
Ah.
And one of the things that you reminded me of is that Tony says, your problems are your friends if you can rephrase them that way.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave the example of, he was at the beginning of COVID, he was trying to maintain his his in-person events, and he couldn't, right? Said, well, how can I turn this into an advantage? Well, eventually he realized he could do these things remotely. And this event that we attended 2 weeks ago had 60,000 people attending at $600 a person. That was a $36 million event for Tony Robbins. So that's the opportunity that we all have, right? Is to rephrase our problems into, how can I turn this into something that can be of benefit to me and other people?
Right. Well, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
Lee,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me. How do we balance detaching and being open to change or taking the adventure with staying firmly rooted in our boundaries? Or should we stay firmly rooted in our boundaries? And how do we navigate through boundaries with being open to change?
Okay. Great. Fabulous question. as always. I, when it comes to boundaries, I always have to remind myself that boundaries are for me, not for anybody else. And boundaries are internal, and what they have to do with for me is what am I willing to accept as being part of my world and part of my life, whether that's persons, behaviors of other persons, and so on and so forth. So if I find myself in a situation where I feel like a boundary is getting in my own way, then that's an opportunity for me to look at that boundary and decide if it's really working or not, and then make a decision accordingly because I put that boundary in place, right? So I get to be at choice about whether or not that boundary is serving me any longer, right? Because like everything else, I mean, they're not an absolute. There's something I've put in place. And if I'm going to change it or adjust it or otherwise, then I need to do that in such a way that I'm okay with it. That I don't feel like I'm betraying myself or letting myself down or whatever. It's just a very conscious decision about whether or not it serves me in its current form. Maybe I need to make a tweak or an adjustment or so on. Okay. Does that help? Cool. Wow. All right. You always such good questions back there.
I'll share.
Okay.
Not a question.
Okay. Oh,
I like the quote. It takes a lot of courage to release the familiar and seemingly secure to embrace the new, but there is no real security in what is no longer meaningful. There's more security in the adventurous and exciting, for in movement there is life, and in change there is power.
okay.
Because that was just a really timely reminder for myself, because this last Friday, the 5th, marked 16 months of me being here in the Phoenix area when I picked up my life from Seattle and moved here. So a reminder to myself that I can be courageous and do big things.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
What about boundaries of other things, like a job and things that you didn't put into place?
Right. So if I'm in a job situation, these things, like if I'm in a job situation, I find myself discontent in some way. Yeah, I mean, I'm always at choice, right? I'm always at choice, and it's like I can, like if there's something that happens at work that I'm upset about, or somebody infringes upon what I think is or crosses what I think is about, or I've set as a boundary at work, as far as my employer, there's an opportunity for growth there that says I get to go have a conversation and decide whether or not I need to stay. Maybe I need to find a different position, maybe a different department. Maybe there's a change of some way or something to make along the way. And if I'm discontent, if I'm upset, then obviously there's an opportunity for change or for growth. And whether or not I have the courage, so to speak, to speak up for myself, to take a stand for me and say, you know what? This happened. This is the way I'm feeling as a result of it. What can we do? What's the opportunity here for you, for me, for us to work this out together, right? It's not always easy, and it does take courage sometimes to speak up for ourselves, to make a stand for us. I know that. And what I know too is that if I keep my commitments to myself to loving me, if that's what I'm coming from, things will inevitably work out. So, this too shall pass. Thank you. I'm going to save that story for another time. All right. One more? All right. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you all. Okay. Okay. Steve, could you assist this morning? Thank you, sir. Now's the time. Oh, no, before we do that, we pray. Sorry. Let's take everything and let's take all this into prayer this morning. Wow, Lee. How wonderful it is this morning we've had this opportunity to remember, to recall, to recognize the one power and presence which is God in, through, as, around each and every one of us, expressing itself as love, as light, as peace, as beauty, as joy, as power, as courage. Here in this moment, we not only recognize it, but we realize that it is in us, through us, as us, each and every one, expressing as love and joy, expressing itself as an ever expanded experience of life, of livingness. And so we set aside any thought of lack or limitation, because the light of truth sweeps aside anything unlike itself. How wonderful it is that we get to move into the rest of this day, this week, this life of ours, knowing that it is Spirit-led, that love points the way. And so I know this truth for each and every one of us here, for all of us online, for the community that we serve, for anybody experiencing and expressing and living their spiritual truth, no matter the creed, no matter the belief, no matter the practice. For we know and truly believe that all paths lead to the one. And so we trust in this life, we trust in love, we trust in joy right now. We trust in the infinite life and spirit that is each and every one of us, expressing itself more fully right here and right now. We let go truly of everything that has gone before and accept the fullness of life expressing as each and every one of us. And so we let it be, and so it is.